sometimes dealers probably don't focus where they should on social media because they don't see an immediate result. They can't get away from, I sold the same amount of cars this month as I did last. I'm not going to keep doing this.
How do you think that social media has changed the car sales industry?
For dealers that really want to go all in on it, I think it gives them a huge opportunity to compete or outdo people that might have larger budgets. I think social media allows your prospects or your audience to kind of judge who you are for themselves. To me, it's a brand play, right? It's a relationship play as well. I think the one thing I did not do well early in those first 20 years, I had good relationships, but they were relationships that served me. My relationships today are completely different than they were in the first, it's not even close. And I think it's an easy way for dealers to form relationships, which eventually leads to a lot more business. But they got to know how to work that right.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're talking to Scott Joseph, who is the CEO and founder and creator of the Me Plus Ultra Mastermind. We're going to be talking all about that, and I am so glad to welcome my friend Scott to the show. Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to get to talk to you, but before we start, why don't you tell everybody what is it that you do right now and who you serve right now?
I serve entrepreneurs, business leaders with Me Plus Ultra, which is a mastermind group that I started a year and a half ago.
Okay, and how's it going?
It's going great.
It's going great. And full transparency, I am a member.
Yes, you are.
So I know,
new member.
I know
That's right.
how amazing it is. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit of, like, where did you come from? Can you tell us a little bit of, first of all, which area of the United States should we picture you growing up in?
Well, growing up Cincinnati, Ohio. So most of my life I've been in Louisville, Kentucky.
Which is super near and dear to my heart because I spent time over there in the early aughts, and I just love Louisville so much. And I got to go there, and I have to say that my life completely changed when I went to your event in Louisville. So before we get there, because I know this is going to get, I'm totally going to overshare here about everything that has happened in my life because of your event. How did you get into the automotive industry?
I'm 56 years old, so you're making me go way back in time.
Way back.
Yeah. So I was, this is not the political correct term. I think today they're called lot attendants. But back then I was a lot boy. All right.
What does that mean?
That means I moved cars around, I cleaned them.
Got it.
So
Got it.
I was working, that was my job while I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was the general manager for a large dealer group, Jeff Weiler, which is out of Cincinnati. Green Tree Toyota, down in the dealership he owned down in Clarksville, Indiana, which is right across the river from Louisville. So my dad's running that store, and I'm in college, and I used to have to go in during lunch, and I'd be the only person that watched these tapes. So I'd go in, and I literally watch nothing but sales, training tapes. Back then it was VHS.
Yeah.
And so I'm putting those things in, eating lunch, watching how to sell cars. And the reason I did that is because my dad used to sell vacuums at Sears. And when he eventually started selling cars, he did very well. He was instantly, within 2 years, I think he was ranked in the top 10 nationwide in terms of back then Lincoln Mercury, which he then went on to sell the Chevrolets at Jeff Weiler and then run his Green Tree Toyota store. So my lifestyle completely changed when I saw him get into that industry.
Yeah.
And it's just what I wanted to do. My dad was my hero, and I thought, all right, I'm gonna follow in his footsteps and do that. So he's out in what's called a 20 group meeting, which is 20 dealers get together, they share best practices and try to level up. And all the while prior to that, I'm like, Dad, let me sell. No. So he's out in California on this 20 group meeting. I called up one of Jeff's stores up in Cincinnati, and I said, I want to sell cars. They said, well, when can you come up for an interview? I said, I can be there in an hour and a half. So I drove up, got the job, moved out of the house, moved up to Cincinnati, and started selling cars.
Wow.
So
why didn't your dad want you to sell his cars?
He wanted me to finish school, and he probably didn't want that dynamic of me doing it in his store. And so, they come back and realize, well, he dropped out of school. He's selling cars. I took the easy path because I knew, because of my dad, I knew it would be an easy interview and I knew I'd get the chance, which is what happened. fast forward a little bit, it was much tougher than I thought it would be.
Mhm.
At the time I was 19, and
Tell us what that is like for anybody who has never sold a car before. They only know about car salesmen because they've had to deal with car salesmen, but they don't know what that life is like. What insight can you give us?
what I love about car sale, I think it's one of the true sales professions that, to me, it's real selling. You're not only selling the vehicle, you're selling the buyer or prospect on buying their vehicle and trying to persuade them on that as well. It teaches you very well that there may not be a tomorrow. So one reason that you'll feel there's the best car salespeople will create tremendous pressure on the buyer, but in a good way. They'll create internal pressure, a
Mm.
pressure that you don't recognize as the buyer. That you don't feel like I'm pressuring you.
Right.
The pressure comes from within because you want the car so much, right? And you want the deal or whatever it might be, and you want to do it now. If I'm not good, I still know that there's a likelihood if you walk out that door without buying that I might never see you again. So the bad salesperson creates a lot of external pressure,
Mhm.
which is the majority of salespeople,
Mhm.
right? And so I think,
Give me an example of external pressure. Something people need to watch out for that would be a red flag.
well, I don't want to say red flag, but as much as when I'm giving you things like you need to sign this now, or this deal's off tomorrow type stuff, and that could be at times if there's manufacturer incentives and things. I think that there's a lot of taught closes, word tracks that aren't always sincere and genuine. I want to create things. I want to ask questions when I'm selling that internally I can control the situation. I can control the sales process based on the quality of the questions I ask a customer. And if I'm asking good questions internally, you're answering them, whether you're doing it vocal or not. And if I'm asking the right ones, you're going to be setting up in a way where you sell yourself.
Give me an example. I would love to see this in action.
It's hard to do it on the spot,
Yeah.
but I got to remember this is 30 some odd years ago.
Give me an example of internal pressure.
All right. If I'm asking you questions, and let's say forget selling cars. Let's go to what I would do now. Let's say you're considering me plus Ultra,
Hmm.
but I would do it applies to any industry. All right. So if I'm asking you, why did you? So I'm curious. Before you joined, let's pretend you haven't joined it yet. All right. What are some of the reasons? What are some of the reasons you're considering joining me plus Ultra?
Biggest reason is the network is invaluable. The people that you have in there, the people that I met at this event that you invited me to out of the complete kindness of your heart, right? And we're going to get to that event in a minute. But the people that I got to meet there and the opportunities that opened up just because I attended, that was incredible for me. That joining had a lot less to do with what course materials I'm going to find in the portal or even access to the weekly calls, which is super valuable. It was the network that I was joining. So
What about the network made it so valuable for you?
the potential to, number one, learn way more about an industry that I'm entering right now.
Yep.
And number two, getting clients.
The what were you doing prior to that in terms of like networking and stuff? So in other words, what made this so much valuable versus what you were doing before?
I had nothing before. You, this is so funny. You created the opportunity for me. There was no opportunity before you did, right? It's almost like when you create demand for a product out of nothing. It's not like there was me wanting to join the automotive industry before I met you. It's I met you and then I wanted to join and then I had nowhere else to look for advice, for clients, for a network, for a community. There was nowhere else. You created the demand. you
And-
created the demand internally in me.
And so let me ask you this question. So like how many years before doing, say, Business Bourbon Cigars and Me Plus Ultra, how many years have you been in business doing what you do?
Around 14, 15.
14, 15 years. So if you had had an opportunity like, say, Business Bourbon Cigars, Me Plus Ultra, where you could really network with people, 14, let's not even go there. Let's just say 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What would that have done for you over the last 10 years?
I would have 10 years worth of growth under my
So
belt.
maybe a better question might be, what do you think it's cost you by not having access to those type of people over the last 10 years?
I would say absolute clarity in what I want to do,
Yep.
an absolute business plan to follow.
Yep.
There was no path. So if I had started this 10 years ago, where would I be today?
Yep.
I'd be the CEO of multi employees, and I would be serving dozens of clients, and life would be completely different.
Now, have you ever joined or belonged to any type of mastermind group before?
Yes, I have many of them.
All right, so I'm curious, let's just take the one that you like the most prior to Me Plus Ultra, of course.
Of course.
What are 2 or 3 things that you really loved about them that were most important to you?
Number one, I was learning something new, because after you've been in business for this long,
Right.
you've been around the block. You
Yep.
have learned a lot of things. Even if you're not applying them, there's a lot that you feel like you already know. So learning something new has always been a high interest for me, because it's a very hot commodity in my life, because
Yeah.
I don't get to learn a lot of new things all the time. So learning something new. And number two, just being given an exact framework on how to succeed. And even in past masterminds would have been given that framework. Maybe it's because it always seemed like it should work right away. Like it's always sold that way, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Well,
joined
that's
today.
what I'm about to ask next is like,
Right,
what would be 2 or 3 things that you wish those groups would have improved on?
right. It's maybe probably have not just like this is a framework for things to work out in the next 7 days. Maybe would have been more like a vision of what is happening
Yeah.
by following that framework. Not just do this, be rich. Is here are the things you can do, but this is the ultimate vision that you're going for. I feel like that might be maybe one thing that has been missing in the past.
Yeah. Now, when you turned to Business Bourbon Cigars, did it solve some of those issues for you?
It created a completely new vision. It's
Okay.
something that wasn't even there before.
So that would be, and then I would just continue to take you down this path. Some of your answers, first off, you're kind of saying things that I would want to say in a sales pitch, but now I don't have to say it, and it's more true when you say it.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
When you ask questions and you're answering, I can say all those things, but in your mind you might be like, eh. But
Yeah.
if you say it, it's real for you, right? So it's real. Everything you just said is real for you, and at the same time, you've now told me what's most important to you. By the way, money never came up with you. And so it would be a mistake for me to then start talking about Me Plus Ultra and how it's going to increase your income. It might be important at some point, but it wasn't most important to you. So I'm going to talk about vision. I'm going to talk about the network, what you'll be able to do with that, how it can expand new opportunities, things like that, and take it from there. So
Wow.
So-
It's like mind blown.
So whereas an external pressure, I'm going to be just really talking up stuff and be like, hey, you need to make a decision today because of this and that. And you know, I've got 5 spots, only 5 spots open, 4 are already taken. I got 1 left, you know,
Right.
those type of tactics.
I love that. So that's
You really
what,
put me on the spot.
no, I mean, but you did great. You did great. You illustrated what that process should really feel like.
And by the way, what I did there, we all know when we're selling, to bash a competitor is the worst thing you can do.
Right.
It makes you look it's very unprofessional, but it also forces the prospect you're talking to somewhat in their mind defend. The worst thing I could do is sit there and tell you how bad those masterminds were because you've paid for them.
Right.
So internally, you're going to sit there and want to defend why you got to justify why you paid for it and why
Exactly.
you continued on, right? So the reason you ask, what did you love about it is, for one, I'm getting information about what's most important to you. And then the reason I'm going to follow up with, what are some things that really need to be improved on? You're now telling me what they didn't do well. And I can then, when I'm pitching you my product, I can just sit there and say, one of the things that we do so you can avoid this is we do this, this, and this, right? And then I'll also build on what you liked. So and I finish, by the way, on the bad. So your last thought about the other product is not the positive, it's the negative. But you're doing it, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
This is amazing.
All right.
This is amazing. You were a salesman a long time ago. Can I just ask you, right now with social media being, if we can talk about that just for a second,
Yeah.
right now with social media being so prevalent in everybody's life, like
Yeah.
let alone just car sales, but just in everyone's life. The first thing you and I are both going to do when we get out of this room is check our phones,
Yeah.
right? With that being the life that everybody's living right now, how do you think that social media has changed the car sales industry?
I think it gives, well, let me ask a question first. For who? The
For
dealer, the salesperson,
for dealers.
I think it gives for dealers that really want to go all in on it. I think it gives them a huge opportunity to compete or outdo people that might have larger budgets. Now, I don't want to act like it's free because it takes a lot of time and effort to do it right. But there's the same level of hard cost is not there
Mhm.
in terms of just buying ads and marketing yourself that way. It also gives you, I read something a while ago, has nothing to do with social media as much as there was a business executive out there and did not like the way, whether it was former employees, other people were kind of positioning him. And I think social media allows your prospects or your audience to kind of judge who you are for themselves. In other words, your story is not going to be told by others. It's
Mhm.
going to be told by you,
Mhm.
and then people can judge that on their own. Does that make sense? So you kind of control the narrative.
Yeah. What do you think about dealerships who are not making the most use of social media because it's not a TV ad, it's not a radio spot, it's not direct mail, it's not what they already know. So they're like, well, it's an afterthought. We can't even guarantee sales from spending time on social media, so we're just not going to do it right now.
I think the biggest challenge in auto is a lot of them are very short-sighted. Back when I started J&L marketing, this is what, 91, there was no digital then. There was no social. So there was television, there was radio, there was newspaper, and then the fourth was direct mail. And it was a distant fourth. What made us successful is because I could go in with a half of the newspaper budget, especially in a big market. Like back then, full page ad in say Dallas would run a dealer $25,000, $30,000. I could take half of that and sell 3 times the amount of cars. Dealers were very short. They're very short term focused. They want to know, what did I do today? What am I going to do tomorrow? They're not thinking necessarily, especially the general managers. They're not thinking because they're paid on the now. They're
Mhm.
paid every month. And so I think that helped J&L marketing because our events worked so well. It was like crack. Once they got they just kept running them, right?
Mhm.
So I benefited from that. I think digital's a little bit different. Digital plays because you got high level stuff where you're doing a lot of branding. You're getting people into the funnel early, but you're also attacking all those people that are in market now. So there's this combination of direct marketing, direct response, along with some brand plays as well. And that's more of a SaaS model. So that I enjoy much better from the agency owner. I think dealers, though, getting back to your question, you're gonna have to rein me in. I can go all I can get down the rabbit holes.
I want to squeeze your brain
So
into this microphone.
I think as an industry, and I own dealerships. I think as an industry we do a very poor job thinking long term. And where this goes back to social media is sometimes dealers probably don't focus where they should on social media because they don't see an immediate result and they give up. And I think there's probably a lot that buy into, I'm going to do this, but they can't get away from, I sold the same amount of cars this month as I did last. I'm not going to keep doing this. You can't get away from it. And so you have to do a good job educating, doing support, and you got to find dealers that have a long-term vision to keep going with that. I like it because to me, it's a brand play, right? It's a relationship play as well. And so if I could go back in time in my business career, you know, I think the one thing I did not do well early in those first 20 years, I had good relationships, but they were relationships that served me, right? My relationships today are completely different than they were in the first. It's not even close. You're a good example, right?
Hmm.
We met a few years ago at a convention, hit it off, and stayed in touch, and just things kind of just happened,
Yeah.
right? But it wasn't. There was neither one of us were doing anything. Neither one of us really tried to sell anybody. We were just helping each other with different things. Now, lo and behold, things have happened both for you and I.
Yeah.
So it's good. I think dealers, I love it as a brand play. I love it. But then I go back to what I initially learned from you at that convention. How do I monetize a small audience? I love that title
Yeah.
because I think most of the people out there in social media don't have huge audiences.
Hmm.
So you're dealing in a big market, and they all need to know how to do that. And it comes down to relationships and how you form that. And I think it's an easy way for dealers to form relationships, and really real relationships where there's support going back and forth, which eventually leads to a lot more business. But they got to know how to work that right. And that's a change of their that's a change in their model.
So, how did the idea for these events, these business bourbon and cigar events, come about?
I started this mastermind group kind of in reverse of the way this normally works. So I actually started with the event Business Bourbon Cigars and worked my way backwards to the group. Business Bourbon Cigars started during COVID. So what happened was, in those first couple of weeks when everybody was shutting down and we got locked, we were forced to lock in, and we weren't allowed to go anywhere. We had a lot of different dealers, because back then it was all focused on automotive,
Hmm.
and a lot of dealers, depending on what state they were in, really had no clear game plan as to what they were going to do. Some states weren't even allowed to sell. Pennsylvania, you weren't even allowed to sell cars online for a period of time.
Oh, wow.
And so some states allowed you to service vehicles because that was an emergency type situation. And so the rules were changing all over the place. So, Sandy Cerami,
Yeah, I
all right,
do.
good friend out of New Jersey, him and I discussed, hey, let's do virtual meetings, and for an hour, and we do it once a week, called Dealer Information Weekly, DWIN, Dealer Weekly Information Network. And what we did was we brought in like attorneys, HR people, marketing people, CPAs, so we could cover all topics: PPP loans, how to do layoffs, furloughs. Everybody was trying to understand, what's the best way to navigate this. And so we were doing that for a period of time, and it was going well. I think people appreciated it. And Sandy, so, if you can go back in time to 2020, people started getting a little stir crazy.
Hmm.
We're like, we're missing our going out and socializing because we couldn't go around anybody. And so I think Sandy goes, hey, let's hop on a Zoom Friday, 5 o'clock. We'll call it a happy hour. He goes, bring a bourbon. I said, yeah, and let's do a cigar. All right. So we did that. And it was only just a meeting on how we were going to make these weekly virtual things better. And so we had a blast. I mean, what bourbon do you have, and what cigar? And we're talking about all that, and 5 pages of notes on how to improve this thing. So we were like, wow, that was really productive. So we did this a couple weeks. That became a normal thing for us because we enjoyed it and we were productive with it. Invited Jamil Zabaneh, who's the
Hmm.
CEO of my marketing agency, J&L. And we noticed there's a box missing because, on your phone, you're seeing the Zoom call, right? And you got your 3. And so we go, we should have one of our dealer clients or prospects come in. We'll call it the 4th box, and come in, and it's invite only. So on DWin, we went in and say, hey guys, we're inviting somebody to come in once a week to the 4th box. We do a bourbon, we do a cigar, and we talk business. And then, we just said, you don't have to do all 3. You just got to be able to check 2 of the 3 boxes. All right. And so we had dealers literally just like, I want in on this. And so these were people that weren't even clients. And when we did these, we were having so much fun, and the meetings were so productive. I mean, people were just taking down all kinds of notes, these 4th box meetings, that some of these things lasted 2 and 3 hours.
Hmm.
We couldn't get these people off the phone. And these are people prior to COVID. If we had called them, wouldn't have given us the time of day.
Yeah.
All right. And so we thought, we're kind of onto something. So fast forward to like October, and Sandy and I were like, I think people just want to do something in person. So 3 weeks planning, we planned our first, back then it was called 4th box. The next one we changed it to Business Bourbon and Cigars. We had 13 people show up. We did true mastermind sessions.
Hmm.
We can get into that if you want, but we did real mastermind sessions in the business part of this retreat. Really went well, and then we did the second half of the day where we did because out in Louisville we got Buffalo Trace and some really cool spots to do tours. So we did some bourbon tours and the little cigar action, and that's how it came, and it just kind of grew from there.
Let's talk a little bit about this mastermind model.
Yeah.
So, just following in your career a little bit, you had started as a car salesman, but then when did tell me like the 10-second story of how did you turn into talking about marketing for dealerships, and how did you, like, did you know that you were going to be creating a community for dealerships eventually? Like, how did that path take you out of direct sales into where you are now?
That's a great question. This is going to take a lot more than 10 seconds. So, so, so prepare. I'm selling cars, and I grew up. I told you my hero is my dad. My second hero was really the guy that owned all the stores, Jeff Weiler, because I was a young kid when I first met him, and I was impressed in the sense of like, well, first off, he'd give us. My dad was always a top performer, so we always got front row seats to wrestling, Hulk Hogan, and all those things back in the day. Reds tickets, Cincinnati Reds tickets, Bengals tickets. So I just thought, man, well, this is great. What a great guy, right? And so I quit school to drop out early to follow in what my dad did. I said, I don't need school. He didn't go to school. And look where he's at. So about 3 months in, 4 months in, I started having a little bit of success. And I was young, though. I was immature. I was naive. I could not sustain success because I'd have a great month. There were some months, not in the first 4, but eventually over that first year, where I'd be in top 5 out of the whole dealer group, which I didn't have this huge customer base. So I had success. But the next month, I'd fall flat on my face because I had all that money in my pocket at 19, and I didn't work as hard the second month, all right, or the next month. And so first few months, though, Mr. Weiler comes in and he calls me into his office. And I didn't drop out of school to sell cars. I dropped out of school to eventually become a general manager.
Right.
And so I'm like, all right, here we go. This is the path. First question, why'd you drop out of school? I'm like, ah. So I've told him, here's the path I want. Here we go. And he goes, well, in 10 years, when I'm considering you to be considering you to be a general manager, he goes, I'm going to want general managers to understand the value of the yen and compared to the dollar and what that means. And I'm thinking to myself, the hell? No one cares about any of that today. And it comes down to selling and relationships and people. But he lost me when he said the 10 years. I really did not hear much of what he said or pay attention to it after he said that, because I'm thinking to myself, I did not drop out of school to wait 10 years. I dropped out of school to jumpstart and get way ahead of that.
Right.
I'm not waiting until I'm almost 30 years old. And I look at that now as so naive and so entitled, horrible. But that was my thought process. So I've got a friend, Pat Luck. That's the L and J and L, by the way.
Uh-huh.
He was doing very well selling direct mail, high-impact sale events to car dealers. And he was doing better than me. And I thought I should be doing as good as him. So he came to me and says, why don't we start this company doing this? So I was like, yeah, all right, I'm doing it. And, I went in, told my dad. At this point, this is a year and a half, 2 years down the road. So I'm 22 at this point. And at this point, I'm now working for my dad, selling cars.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he's the one I want to learn from. And Dad pulled me into his office, told him, he goes, you'll be back here in 3 months. And I thought, all right. So me and my
There's
dad.
a challenge.
Yeah, it was a very competitive family. And it was tough. First few months, outside of my dad's stores, he did support it. He ran. Pat had a good client that was consistently running. But outside of that, because we were making an excuse of the Persian Gulf War back at that time. I think that was the first one. So dealers were tightening up their budgets, and it's all excuses. But it started off slow. I had one dealer that finally just sold 65 cars in one day. And from then I was able to go on to a bunch of other stores that had told me no and say, hey, we just did this. And of course, now they're like, yeah, all right, I'll try that. And it took off from there. But what happened was, and I think it's a great lesson, I didn't go into this with a great strategy. I always say I lucked into stuff, and I think it's the hard work is what created the luck. But I'd have sales that were great. We'd have events then that we called incomplete successes. They weren't that good.
Mm-hmm.
Similar traffic, all right? And I was like, I've got to figure out why these work and these don't. So it was about self-preservation. It wasn't some big genius business plan. But I literally went on the road. I interviewed all the top general managers, dealers, some of their top salespeople that were running our events and always having success. And I was looking for, what are they doing that all these other people weren't doing? And so I did come up with like 7 specific things that all these stores did. And I thought, I need to teach and have everybody do these 7 things. So all of a sudden, we started teaching every client in advance what to do before, during, and after every event. Results skyrocket for everybody across the board. Not everybody, but much higher percentage
Yeah.
of success. So all of a sudden now our support was better than the people we were competing against. All this, we always sent someone in, which was unique to us. It was the only differentiator we had at the time. I'd send someone in to survey customers, and I thought, I'm getting all this data. I need to defend myself. So when stores don't have success, I can go back to them with the data. So it was more just self-preservation,
Yeah.
not understanding. And so we built a database, and it allowed me to all of a sudden isolate down to a single variable. Like I could sit there and have 100 different events going on in one weekend, and I could sit there and say, I want to know all the events that did this versus all the ones that did this, and the only change is the headline, or the only change was the offer, or the only change, whatever it could be. I could isolate down to a single variable, so I knew exactly the impact of that one change had.
Wow. You were doing A/B testing.
Correct. And so, I was the only one that able to do that because it's pre-internet. I was the only one with people on the ground collecting the data.
Wow.
And those people, then I quickly learned I got to train these people to ask the questions the right way, because if you and I could ask the same question and get to the same person and get two different answers based on how we asked the question. So we had to train on not only what to ask, but how to ask it and why that was important. So I could get consistency across the board, no matter what city, state, or somebody might be in. So I could isolate down to cities and do these studies, state, national, by manufacturer, rural versus metro. It didn't matter what it would be, headlines to offers,
This is starting to become a really big operation. Like
Exactly.
how many people were working
Well, that
for you at the
became all of a
time?
sudden less than 10. It was beautiful.
Wow.
I often look back and just envy those moments, thinking, can't wait to grow bigger. And I keep thinking to myself, what an idiot I was. But now all of a sudden the data made us unique. We had support in terms of having people show up, and then the prep work that we did in advance that we were doing to really help them optimize. And because of the data and being able to isolate down, now our marketing strategy was getting better. So really the three things that separated us was our marketing strategy, our data, and our support, right? None of this happened there was no plan to that. It was focusing on how do I make these things better, which is all our clients cared about.
Yeah.
How do I make them better? And I just focused on that, and it was all about money, just like you. Money was not my motivator.
Mm-hmm.
My motivator was I wanted to be recognized as the best at what I did. And the only way I could do that was just giving them the results they really wanted and making the experience incredible in terms of the professionalism, making it easy for them to get it done and take as much of the workload off of them as I could.
And you did go back after all that success, basically like running a marketing agency.
Yeah.
You went back and became the owner of dealerships?
Yeah.
How did that
So I completely
how did that
skipped. So
happen?
it's funny, when I first got the job with Jeff Weiler, my goal was never to own. My goal was just to run, because
Right.
that's the level my dad got to.
Yeah.
But it opened up opportunities through relationships
Mm-hmm.
where these opportunities came up to buy stores, and we bought our
Wow.
first one. That store today, if I was to sell it today, it literally is a 12 times return in terms of the value. So we've increased the value of that store over 12 times.
How many dealerships do you own now?
3, we just sold 1, so 2, all Honda. So, but that's not I could have kept buying stores, but that's really wasn't it was no longer my passion. That time had come and gone for me. So
Yeah.
at one point, that was my ultimate thing. Like, yeah, I would love to do that once I got the funds to be able to do it. And once I did it, I like it. I've got managing partners. They do a great job, so I don't have to get involved in the day-to-day. I no longer am involved in the day-to-day of J&L marketing. So I've got a managing partner, a CEO, and Jamil, which leads us to finally answering your question, I think. How in the heck did I get to Me Plus Ultra? It's a
Into
little
Me
longer than
Plus
10
Ultra.
seconds.
So you told us how it kind of started with the business bourbon and cigar events,
Yeah.
which now, if I can inject my little path to it in that story, when you invited me to go to the event, I can't really remember being completely aware that I was walking into a room full of automotive industry
And it was,
leaders.
but it's about half. I'd say it's
Yeah.
about half now. Yeah.
I had no
Yeah.
idea. I knew you
Yeah.
from PodFest.
Yeah.
That's where we met as podcasters, right?
Yeah.
I had been on your podcast. I
Yeah.
was interested in interviewing you for mine. So I'm like, hey, it's so nice of you, so kind of you to like invite me to this event. So let me go and see. And I walk in on the first day, and at the time, I'm a business coach serving online coaches, and I walk in and I realize where I am, and I'm like, how is this gonna go? What am I doing here? How am I going to be helpful to them when they don't do digital products? And how are they going to be helpful to me? Because I'm in digital products and they're not. So I'm gonna tell you there were two mastermind tables, and I love it how you say like true masterminds,
It is.
right? That you walk in with a problem, and then people with masters in their own domain will give you advice on
That's
it,
right.
which is incredible. So there were two tables, consecutive tables, so one event and then later. The first one I went to, I'm like, I threw my hands up in there. I'm like, well, Jesus, take the wheel, right? Like I'm here for a reason, right? And I'm just gonna let the universe reveal to me what I'm here for.
Yeah.
And all I have right now is my truth, which is my biggest challenge right now is selling my digital academy, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I said. I'm like, all right, guys, I need help figuring out how to sell my digital academy to more people. Go. And they were very nice. Everybody was very kind. Of course, they're leaders of industry. Of course, they have good advice for me, but it's not in the same genre, right? So I'm like, okay, I took some notes. I'm like, this was good. This was good. It's fine. Then a couple of people were, given their challenge, and there was, one particular individual who said, I have a dealership and I know I should be on social media and I just have no clue how to do it. And I looked at everybody who is not really like in the social media game, and I think to myself, I just kind of raise my hand like
This is why I asked you. I knew you could help people with this.
I had no
Yeah.
idea. Up until that moment I had no idea what I was doing there. And I'm like, I have thoughts, right? So I gave him, listen, this is what I would be doing. These are things I would be looking into. And you could see his eyes just like widened, like, we need to talk. And that became my first dealership client.
That's right.
And so as soon as I walked away from that table, I realized, okay, universe, I get it. I am not here to take. I am here to give.
Yes.
So all I'm going to do through these 3 days, whatever time we were there, I'm just going to give. If I hear somebody with a problem that I think I can solve, I'm just going to say what's on my mind. So I went to the second, after I talked to a bunch of people, I'm like, okay, I can see this. I can see this turning into a thing. I go to the second mastermind table, and I'm sitting next to a John Traver, who is a mentor to dealership industry, to automotive industry leaders. He has, multiple businesses.
Yep.
He's sitting next to me. And I go in with a different proposition now. I go in, okay, my challenge is, how do I sell social media to dealerships, right? Like completely change. I'm like, okay, pivot, market research. Let's see what they have to say about that. John Traver has just completely taken me under his wing. He had a perfect vision for how, and I will never forget his words. He's like, I can see this turning into a company that you could sell. And that I've never thought about my business in those terms before.
Yeah.
And I looked at him like, I don't know what this is, and I don't know what this was, but I need more of this. And I ended up going to see him in Dallas. He was extremely generous with me. And all of a sudden, I am the auto social gal. I am out there just putting myself out there to help dealerships. And once I started looking for it, I started to see how much need there was in this field that I could provide my
which
expertise
is why I
for.
asked you. You give me a little chills here because I believe in the whole universe thing too. All right. I don't know if you know Jay Tepley, but she was a guest on on my podcast a couple times, and I've actually hired her to work with me. It's a whole nother story as to why I got into Me Plus Ultra. But she likes to describe it. The energy, you have to be able to recognize where the universe is trying to take you. And she loves to bring up water. Water always gets where it needs to go. And it usually finds the easiest path, which is why, and you have to recognize what that path is and go with it. And so when you sit there and say, I never thought of my business selling it and eventually becoming a business that I could sell. So you're going to love when you show up to Charleston in March because I've got an expert speaker that specializes in that, and he'll be participating in all the masterminds.
Wow.
And really, so how to set your business up from a scalability standpoint and position it so if that time ever comes, it's well positioned. You'll get the most value out of it. And the reason that's important, even if you're not interested in selling your business, it's still important as a business owner to create it and build it in a way where it is the most valuable on the market, whether you sell it or not.
Right.
It just means it's a better business model. It's operating at a higher efficiency. It's more productive. You're optimizing your business, right? And so whether you're selling it or not, following what he's going to be showing you will only make it stronger. So that's coming. And so when you said that, I was like, nice.
All the pieces coming together.
Exactly.
You just don't know.
Exactly.
Right? So I just had to say that the power of that event was palpable. It created a completely new avenue. It opened a completely new door that I wasn't looking for, that I didn't know was there. So I would really love to know, how did you, the events, it seems like, slam dunk, you started with the fourth square, right?
Yeah. Fourth box.
The fourth box. And turning it into Business Bourbon and Cigars. How did the mastermind idea come about? That is, by the way, the mastermind idea is extremely pervasive in the online coaching world. Like, I've known about mastermind.
It's the most overused word in online
totally.
stuff. Yeah.
And masterminds was my gateway into this entire world.
Yeah.
Right. So now that you've made a huge transition from dealership owner, from direct mail marketing, from all of that to the mastermind universe, which is an online world. So how did that transition happen for you?
In the last, as J&L evolved from direct marketing to then, full-on digital marketing agency to now a MarTech agency, as those pivots happened, they took a toll on me. I had no business training. I built this stuff out of just kind of hard work, paying attention to clients and employees and doing it, and probably more at the time, if I'm being honest, more what my clients had to say than my employees, which can. So I had to learn that part of it from a leadership standpoint, and it just got to the point for me. Jamil was on at this point and really helping shape the digital product, and as he was doing that, it wasn't my passion. It was no longer my thing, and I stayed in longer than I should have because I didn't have another plan. It was really my identity, right? Yeah. But what used to excite me became very mundane to me. And when you have one foot in and one foot out, and you're not, the universe is trying to tell me, this is no longer your path, Scott. And I was fighting it. Doesn't matter how much success you have, there's different levels to your comfort zone. Some people have a comfort zone that's very small. And as they expand it, or they get outside of it and start accomplishing some things, one of two things are going to happen. All of a sudden, you start living in this bigger comfort zone, or that is so uncomfortable for you, you retreat back to your prior one. All right? Mm-hmm. Mine expanded, I stayed, and hopefully over time it kept expanding and it stayed. But when it was time to move on and expand again, once it got to a certain size, when it was time to expand again, if I'm really looking back and really doing a good self-assessment, it got to a point where, all right, well, now maybe I don't want to lose what I have. Maybe I'm not willing. Maybe I thought I was a risk taker, but I'm not the risk taker I thought anymore. And ego gets in your way. So before, I didn't care about my ego because I had never accomplished anything. Well, now I think people pay attention and, there's a perception of you that I don't want to ruin and start something up and not be successful at it. That would be a blow. Yeah. And the ego blow is actually that would be more painful for me probably than the money. Right. And so I think that there were some elements of that. And so I brought up Jay. I worked with her. I actually did a year work with her online. She lives over in London, and did a 2-week thing in Costa Rica with her. And over time, what I realized was I always enjoyed scenarios where I'd get down with other business leaders. I'd meet them at conferences or this and that. We'd be enjoying a cigar, bourbon, whatever, dinner, whatever, and we'd be talking about some of our challenges. And I really enjoyed helping them. But I'm not a consultant. I don't want to be a consultant. But I enjoyed talking strategy with them. And part of the reason I enjoy talking strategy is I'm at a point where I don't want to execute on them anymore. but I love giving my opinions on it, and I feel like those opinions are pretty good. So there's that element, and then I start doing these events, and through those events, I'm watching relationships form, like the one you mentioned,
Yeah.
right, with you and Mike and John, and I'm like, I realized introducing and bringing people together, and really trying to drive why I'm bringing you together, and making sure you guys get it, is what I really love doing. And so I started trying to think, all right, maybe this needs to just be its own business, but doing events only doesn't pencil for me the way I want to do them. I'm not trying to make Business Bourbon Cigars having 5,000. I really don't have any interest in that. I want it to be impactful. I want it to be because if I had 5,000 people, I just see it with the way I do it being very difficult in getting the enjoyment I get out of it. Bringing the right people together, introducing them, watching something great happen from it. So as I'm working with Jay, I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I trying to? I'm sitting there like, well, if I run 2 events, and I'm like, this is gonna. As I take this down, I'm just gonna recreate what I didn't like, what I left before. I said, I'm not doing that again. And so I thought, all right, how do I get this? And I thought, why wouldn't I just form a group, create a lot of value there? I get all the same enjoyment, and the bigger the group gets, and now I just about helping them and recruiting more members in. And if that's all I do, then I don't have to worry about filling this event. I don't have to do more of these events because the membership will just take care of that, which is what happened. That's
Yeah.
how I got into it.
Yeah.
And now it allows me to focus on, I can go story after story of what you just described. And I mean, some are really big deals that have come all from this. My entire network, you know Mario,
Hmm.
all right?
He's a good friend of the podcast. We had him here
He's
a little
awesome.
while ago.
And, he's interviewing me because I'm going to do a book with him.
Hmm.
And by the way, I met him through all this. And
Right.
so he asked me, he goes, how long have you known this person, and that person, this person? And I realized these people are all like 3 years or less. They're all from this group. Like my best friends, he goes, I thought you knew these people like 10, 15 years. And I was like, nah, I've never thought of it like that. Like my relationships today are real and they're strong and they go past business. They're like, these are the first people I call for fun. These are the first people I just love it. And
Yeah.
so but it's to me, I know I'm on the right path for where the universe wants to take me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It seems like this is a great point for us to like just bring back to the fact that you found a way to bring joy not just to yourself through your work, but through other people around you and
Yeah.
completely change lives. You've completely changed mine. And like you said, we met 3 years ago at some event completely unrelated. We just stayed in touch. Nobody's selling anything. And now there's a new business that was born because of it. So
Yep.
I'm just going to say very publicly, thank you for putting those
Thank you.
opportunities in front of me and for creating that for everybody who's in your group. So before we go, there's 2 questions that I love to ask every guest.
All right.
One is,
I should have prepared.
I should have told them to you in advance, but now you
Yeah.
get to think about them on the fly. What is the biggest misconception that people have of you as a successful business person?
I think there's 2. One is I don't think exist anymore, and I kind of alluded to it. First half of my business career, I was a little hard, a little cold,
Mm.
very isolated, not selfish, but over the top demanding. We're going to get this result. I don't give a about what you think. We're getting it done.
Mhm.
And I think that has changed for me. And maybe it's just easier when you're not involved in the day to day of some of these businesses. Yeah, of course,
Right.
it's easier to change. But I think that the funny, I kind of like this perception. The one I think a lot of people don't think I do. All right, and I'm okay with that because I don't want to be the guy that grinds.
Mhm.
Listen, if you're going to build a business, it goes without saying you have to go through and you got to put in probably a lot more time and effort than most people realize. There's a
Right.
lot that goes into it.
Right.
That's a given. But it doesn't have to feel that way. And today, I told this to somebody just the other day, Pat Fogarty. He goes, I was talking to someone, I've never been busier. I've got my hands in more things. I've got dealerships. I've got J&L. I've got Me Plus Ultra, which includes the Business Bourbon Cigar events. I'm working on a real estate project, and I have no knowledge of real estate. And I'm working on another business I'm about to start, which will be my biggest thing I've ever done. The real estate thing and the thing I can't mention yet,
Mhm.
if these happened 5 years ago, I would have said, for the new business, I would have said somebody should invent this.
Mhm.
Well, now because of my connections and my relationships and my network, it doesn't scare me at all. I mean, I'm like, I know I can get help here, 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 here. I'm doing this, and it's going to be huge. And the real estate side is a passion project. I know, but I know enough people that I'm like, no fear with that either. And so it's just a capacity and time thing with me. But I'm involved in more than I've ever done. From a financial thing, more successful than I've ever been. But none of it feels like a grind. I'm working harder than I've ever worked, but it doesn't feel like if I feel like I don't do anything.
Yeah.
It's a weird feeling. It's almost like you feel guilty. I've got friends, people that you know. I'm not going to say the names. Well, we'll say it. Dave Boyle. You know,
Yep.
he comes to the house. I think they came up for last Derby. He gets in my car, driving Sandy Ceramic. He goes, I think I got Scott figured out. He doesn't do anything. So if that's the perception, that means I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
So I
love
love that.
And the final question is, if everybody, and let's say dealership owners, if all dealership owners who are listening to this had to do one thing to grow their businesses, make their lives better, whatever you think they should be doing, but they have to do that thing in the next 24 hours, what do you think that one thing needs to be?
I go back to people. I think it has to start with, if I only got 24, I was going to, before you put that clause in, I was going to say I would build and strengthen relationships. So I think if I only got 24 hours, I'd go to the relationships I had and strengthen them. Mm-hmm. And I think the only way that you strengthen those is, I often talk about giving, giving, giving. And I think you do it from that. But you can't do it because you're expecting something in return. Mm-hmm. And I want to go deeper than that. You can't sit there and say, I want to give and I want to help someone, and I don't want anything back in return, but I feel like if I do that enough, eventually I will get stuff. Because that to me is that's not what I'm talking about. Like, I do it because I love it. And I really don't care if I ever get anything back at all. And it's almost like the more I give, the more I get. And it's like, it's a weird dynamic, because I don't want to think like that, because I don't want it to influence the giving. Right? And so I think you help people. I think you look for opportunities to, whether it's introductions to people, you came up with a business idea for someone and be like, hey, have you ever thought about doing, I just think that is what I would do. Yeah. Because it strengthens relationships, and I think people just end up helping people that help them.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I can totally vouch for you having that complete, genuine approach. And I've really, really enjoyed getting to know you over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for doing this. Before we go, can you please tell everybody where to go and follow you, where to find you, plug your podcast, where can people go and get more of you?
Well, the easiest way, me personally, I'm all over LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook. But if you go to meplusultra.com, so me like me, or if you were saying me. Yeah, not me. That's not how the name is a play on knee plus ultra, which is nothing beyond. So, but meplusultra.com, you'll also find the podcast there. And the podcast, Business Bourbon and Cigars, our event is Business Bourbon and Cigars as well. You'll find all that at meplusultra.com. But also, the podcast you can find on anywhere somebody gets their podcast.
Yep. And we're going to put all of those links below. So thank you, Scott, for being here. This has been a total pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening to this podcast and for watching on YouTube. Wherever you are, just make sure you follow, subscribe, so you don't miss another episode of the Superhumans podcast.